Okay, people joining this live stream. This is a probably quite brief meeting about databases and their implementation in version 12. Okay, operator forms. So what is this?
So at the end of our talk, we were approached by Seth and Alan, who are writing books about data science with the Wolfram language. So I guess we should at least discuss it.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So what is their point?
Their point is that they like to, rather than nesting expression one into the other, they like to compose them in a way that
so first of all, that isn't a correct form. That entity class thing there, it's in fact entity class country G8, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what that is. Okay, so now sorted entity class. Okay, what is sorted entity class?
So in this case, you would put G8 as the first argument and population as the second argument.
Okay, so they are asking for a... So the problem there is that there's a third argument to sorted entity class. Well, I mean, we've had this issue many times before. The question is whether the the one argument form can clearly just be a property, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think that's problematic to have that be a property. Okay, which arguments are varargs?
So sorted entity class is vararg, aggregated entity class is vararg, merged entity class is vararg.
Okay, so which entity class functions are we talking about here? So we're talking about...
Should a slash star be slash slash?
Yes, I would think so.
I mean, I was gonna then apply the whole thing to just country.
No, that's crazy. No. This thing, there's no reason to make entity class have just that, right? I think that's a mistake. Entity class should just have its standard form there.
Well, why? I mean, what I'm saying is that entity class is just like the others. If you're using an entity class at some level, why not have that?
Because it's a different form. I mean, this is a different kind of thing. This is by... Oh, you're saying that this could apply itself to the class. That this thing here could be a class.
Yep. But I think the biggest problem is with sub-values of this stuff that are actually doing entity value, rather than whether it's ambiguous with 3 or 2 arguments, etc. I mean, we're introducing an evaluation semantics here.
So I'm sorry, I'm confused here. So this particular thing, okay, what are you saying? I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
What I'm saying is that even if these were all with a definite number of arguments, I think that the fact that we are using sub-values for that is the thing that is most confusing.
I think it's totally a different point. I don't understand. That's a completely different point. That has nothing to do with this. Look, what you're asking for is whether sorted entity class should be able to have the sorting property here as something that can be applied to, right? Tony, are you here?
Yes.
Okay. Whether this is something that can be applied to an entity class, right? That's what you're basically asking. Oh, I see. I see why you're talking about subvalues. Sorry, I now understand what you're talking about. Right, I see what you're saying. So the sub-value here, this thing, in order to make use of it here, and that slash star, that's why you're doing that rather than slash slash. In order to make use of it, in order to make this varargs, no, I'm sorry, in order to make this an operator form, the sub-value has to not mean anything different, correct?
I mean, unless we want to do something with the
No. Let's just be very, very clear what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think that sub-values are more important here, though. Like the entity values, sub-values are
So
way
if
more
we
important.
say sorted entity class of country, comma, population, if I'm not mistaken, that will comma 5, for example. And now
I think with 5, it's not implemented yet. It's one of the discussion points. So remove the 5.
Okay. So then I say something like population here. I will get a list of countries, right?
Yep.
With populations. Okay. Nice. Okay.
So I think that this is more common than this kind of right composition usage. And the right composition usage can be, I mean, if you really want to write code like that, you can basically define your own pure functions to do that. So there is no confusion.
But in particular, I mean, the issue is, the issue is whether to support the this sub-value form or whether to require that you use entity value to get this, correct?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct. That's the thing, right?
Yeah, but I think that this is very well.
No, don't push the. Okay, I'm just trying to understand what the alternatives are. The alternatives are: number one, this is done with a sub-value, right? Number two, that this requires entity value to get this, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm trying to understand what we're talking about here. Okay. Okay. So those are the two. So one use for sub-values. So this is one use, use one for sub-values, right? This is, extracting properties, basically, right? Okay. So use 2 for sub-values, composing functionality, right? That's operator forms, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at what that would look like. Okay, so that would be this, comma, and then we'd say entity class country, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, then you need an empty list as the second argument.
Sorry, what?
You need a list as the second argument of entity class.
Why? Look, sorted entity class, I don't understand. Explain. But then
I'm just saying that the entity class with one argument doesn't exist so far. So.
Oh, I see. Okay. So how do I get all countries? Can I say comma all?
Probably yes. Otherwise, it's empty list.
Okay. Let's check that works. By the way, we've got a bunch of echoes
Yes.
on the line. Okay. All right. Good. Okay. So then this would be the alternative. Would be this, and then to get. In this case, that would be comma population, right? To get out the.
You're mismatching the parentheses, but yes.
Hold on. Sorted entity class of.
After all, you need another bracket. Closing.
Yeah. Okay, fine. Okay, I get it. Okay, so those are the cases, basically, right? So that's the case. In this case, there is no choice, presumably. I don't know whether that's possible. I mean, in other words, is this supportable? Could we do something like this? Is that supportable or is that ambiguous? My guess is that's not supportable.
I mean, I find it also completely backwards because, like, you're nesting in the wrong direction in the end.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah. All right. Okay. Fine. So I think we should not support operator forms there at this time.
Yeah, I also think that if we want to make the change in the future when we know better.
Right. So can somebody send back to these guys this notebook, please?
Sure. If you send, I am already in contact with Seth Chandler. I told him if he wanted to follow the live stream, but he was very busy too. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Okay, all right. Let's go on. Tables with no primary key.
So most sane people don't do it, but there's nothing preventing you from doing it.
Okay.
So basically, the thing is that when the database doesn't declare the constraint for the primary key, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is no key that is unique or no combination of keys that is unique. So we don't need to fail entirely because we can't construct.
Wait. So wait a second. You're saying that there's no entity store, that in the absence of any primary keys, we don't know how to construct an entity store from a database. Is that correct?
No. That's
no,
not
we
correct.
do.
So in the absence of a primary key, we can construct an entity store, but for that specific table, we will never be able to construct single entities unless the user tells us, oh, look, this is the primary key. Treat this as the primary key or as the canonical name. And there is currently syntax to do that. So we cannot do it automatically, but we can let the user specify it.
Sorry, I spaced out for a minute because I'm confused by lots of other things here.
So should I repeat?
Yeah, actually, we have a question on our live stream that I just want to respond to. Syntax would work if you want to sort by population, but then pull out GDP. So let's look at that case, okay, that example. So we want to say, yeah, so if I do this case here, yes, if I do this, sort by population and pull out GDP, that will just work, right? Yeah, that worked. Makes sense? So that, in fact, let me try this just as magnificent. Okay. How do we support sort by reversed population?
It would be population goes to ascending, but no, descending. But I don't know if it's in the builds yet.
Yeah, it should be.
Like this?
Yes.
Magnificent. Okay. It's not. I don't really like this form, but that's okay.
I mean, we might change it later, but
Okay.
we had the discussionality, and we decided that that was the quickest fix.
Okay. Yeah. Now explain the no primary key case.
Okay, so at inspection time, there is a constraint that is in the tables of the database that says this column is the primary key, and that means that.
Could you give me just as an example, just so I know what I'm talking about? Just give me a database to inspect. Do you have?
You should have one from a few meetings ago.
Well, but is it in the example documentation for something?
No, not yet. We haven't put it in yet.
Okay.
But imagine there is just a table with people names.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah,
no primary key. Just.
Okay, let's take the employees of Wolfram right now. You have first name and last name. To this date, those are unique, but there is no constraint that they will be unique.
Yes.
So, what you do when you declare a schema
that's a very interesting question. Whether in the history of our company all name, no, they're definitely not unique. Across history, they're definitely not unique.
No, but at a given moment, at this given moment, they are, I think.
So far, I believe they're unique. Yes, at any given time, but not across history. Yep.
Okay. Well, there is also the problem that there are people who are getting married and they change their last name.
For example, yes.
Yeah. So that's why you shouldn't just have that, but you should have a unique identifier for those people. And so in most cases, there will be a primary key. And when you do that, what you're saying is this column or this set of columns is the primary key. So if you try to add another Stephen Wolfram, then the database will complain that you are breaking the uniqueness. Yes. So now imagine that on inspection of a table, we don't find this constraint for that table.
Okay.
So that is valid syntax, though probably not well recommended. Now, if So if you happen to know that a subset of the columns is unique, then
Okay,
you can
your
say,
main point is that in our entity construction, we need a primary key. We need a unique primary key. Is that correct?
For working with single entities, yes. If you keep working at the class level, then no. Unless you do entity list, you should be good.
Right. So in other words, okay, so the problem here is cannot generate entities with canonical names.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, what is your proposed solution? I mean, should we just generate UUIDs for those things?
No, because UUIDs will not be stable. So there is a terrible solution, which is to compute a hash of all the values of all the columns. But it's terribly slow because every time you want to search for one, you have to do a full table scan.
And it doesn't really guarantee that the data is unique, because if you have
it's crazy. It's crazy.
It's completely crazy. And if you can't write to the database, there's very little you can do. So the things we can do is either we issue a message and we say we're not registering this table because it's broken for entities, or we allow them to register and give them a message that says some functionality will not work with this table.
Okay, so Tony, what is your comment about this?
My comment earlier was that we might be able to use something like row ID, the hidden property of tables, but that needs to be investigated if that can be supported on our backends.
No, some backends support row number, but if you insert in the middle, that changes. So it's like...
Yeah, there is really no solution to this problem, unfortunately.
Well, okay, so wait a second. The main issue is we can't construct an entity store on our side.
No, we can. And we can also perform most of the operations, just not the ones that involve single entities.
How do we construct an entity store without having names of entities?
Because if you perform all the operations with entity value and entity class-like things, then everything works. You don't need single entities.
No, but I don't understand what the structure of the entity store is. If we were to bring it into memory as an entity store, what would it look like?
Well, I guess it would look like the way we could represent it in memory is instead of an association as a list. That's the real difference. You have nothing to index into it, but it doesn't matter. You can perform algebra on it.
Okay, well, look, in terms of what we're going to do here, clearly, can we warn people at the time of inspection that there's an issue like this?
Absolutely, we can. The question is whether we refuse to register it completely or if we give them partial functionality.
Why don't we give them partial functionality so long as nothing will break?
Okay.
So, I mean, okay, so what is the message going to say? Unique primary key. Database has no unique primary key. Database does not have unique kind.
Well, database table T does not have unique.
Okay, right. Does not have unique primary keys defined.
It's actually technically called the primary key constraint.
Well, but I'm going to try and say something about what that means happens.
So then what we can suggest is if you know that a subset of the columns are unique, then you can set it in the entity store. Because I think there is a first error, which is when you are automatically trying to create the entity store, you can't get the primary key for some types.
All right. So,
and
so
then
you
when
guys
you try
make
to
up
register it.
Yeah, I get it. So make up these messages. Let's look at them. Okay.
Okay, I will.
Okay. Sorted entity class overlapping between the third argument of sorted entity class and the behavior of sampled entity class. Okay, so sorted entity class has a number. And sampled entity class also has a number. Well, right, with a default property, basically. Where the default property is some kind of just ID number.
What? No. Sampled entity class, in general, will return something that is not stable.
Right, but so then what I'm asking is, okay, so if I say sampled if I'm saying sampled, so sorted entity class of country, comma, population, and then, okay, so then this, if I say entity list of this, actually, if I say entity list of that, I'll get a happy list of countries. I don't know what order these countries are in. Oh, by population, Antarctica has 0.
Antarctica is missing, which is even weirder.
Okay, somebody went missing in Antarctica, unfortunately. Okay, so then you're saying sampled entity class of country, comma, 5, for example, right? What is that?
Yeah, I don't think this is implemented yet. That's
Okay.
why it's red also. But
I don't
I
see
mean,
a problem with this. This seems perfectly reasonable to me. It's just a random sample of 5 of these.
yeah, not quite random either. I mean, you get what you get if you don't sort.
Yeah,
If
well,
you-
the details should be saying, yeah, right. Okay, is there a problem here, Tony?
Yeah, the only problem that we want to bring up is that sorted entity class in the current proposal has a third argument, which duplicates the argument of sampled entity class.
No, I don't agree. Sampled entity class is a convenience where the sorting criterion is nothing, it's some kind of random internal ID.
Yeah, so, but if you want the 5, if you want a slice and want to sort it, then you sample the sorted entity class.
I know, but that gives you, it seems like a very good convenience to just be able to say, give me the top 5 sorted by population. That seems very useful. And I don't see why we wouldn't support that.
The only reason is keeping that argument for potential future uses. I mean, if we later figure out that we need that for the ordering, that means a direct, then we are stuck with this convenience there.
Okay, I don't know about in built-in entities, but on the database world, the only thing that you might vary when you're sorting is, like, for example, the correlation if you're sorting strings.
Well, to be fair, you're right. That sorted, this is more like sorted by.
Yeah, it is more like sorted by.
Well, look, I agree that it's safer to not use that argument for this. You haven't implemented it yet anyway, right?
We have, but I mean, on the database side is implemented. But can I say something about, like, the current design of sort by, where you have f comma p is strictly less powerful than having a p for each f when f is list. So the current main usage of sorted entity class is actually hidden in the details. It's the one when you have, there's that very weird thing that one does stable ordering and the other doesn't. Remember?
Sorry. You're saying in the case of sorted entity class,
Sort by can take a list as the second argument.
that should be put in the primary. That
It
should
should
be
be,
put up.
yeah, and there is a difference when you have a list of functions of a function that returns a list. Those are not equivalent.
Yeah, I understand. Okay,
And
that's not for this meeting. Not for this meeting. Can we separately talk about that in LCC or ILD, please?
So anyway, my claim was
that. Wait. Is there somebody here who can?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
My claim is that that third argument P is the thing that we currently do with ascending and descending. And we do it per function, per property, not globally.
All right, look, the basic bottom line is there's a bit of a mess between sort by, sorted entity class, and I kind of agree, I'm beginning to agree with Tony that we should not, prejudge this right now and put that argument in there.
But Stephen, what Carlo was saying was that the third argument, if it's intended for ordering, will not serve us well.
I understand that. I understand.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't matter. I don't care very much for that third argument. It's just going to be a little bit more verbose for users.
Let's think about this for a second. Okay, so look, first point is, I guess it's an ILD discussion for sort by and figuring out whether the P in sort by, I mean, we've got separate crazy functions, reverse sort by and things like that. Whether that should be done with that P thing, that ascending, descending thing is kind of a hack, which we don't really want to have to repeat here. But if we're going to do that for the database case, we should do that for the raw list case. Okay?
Yes.
Okay, then, okay, so the question here is, should we use up the third argument of sorted entity class for a count? I kind of think we should, because I think that if we had to use it for a function later, it's easier to disambiguate that from the number.
Oh, and the other thing is that we can put a number, and when you want to, you can say just all, comma, that, or actually infinity.
Yes. All right, let's leave the number, okay? Unless Tony is absolutely freaking out about this. Tony is at least silent. Okay. All right, last item here. Limitations of SQLite for examples. Actually, we have a question on our live stream here. Yeah. On a live stream, Ben points out that if somebody makes a database without primary keys, they don't have a high expectation of functionality. Yes. But who knows what weird stuff they will find out in the wild. Because the user may not be the creator of the database. In fact, usually won't be. Okay, limitations of SQLite. Okay. By registering computed entity properties to convert them.
So yeah, so basically the cool thing is that, so when you inspect an SQLite database, you can never get a date or a Boolean. But on the other hand, we're implementing functions that allow you to get them as a return value in Mathematica. So you can say from Unix time of a column that you know is Unix times, is stored as Unix times. So we could show people how to basically lift up the types by registering computed properties.
Yes. I think that's what we should not mess around trying to host Postgres for this. It's just that's a completely separate project, right? We should just ship an SQLite, tiny SQLite database. We should have examples that don't depend on any of this weird stuff. And then we should also show how you would take an SQLite database and promote it so that it can have these other data types.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so I noticed that we have, so the remaining thing we have to do is a big documentation review, right?
Yes.
Okay, we just have to figure out when and where and how that happens. I see that's listed for early tomorrow. All right, fine. We'll get that at an appropriate time. What roughly is, just to give me a sense roughly of what's going to happen there? I mean, how much of this is not me writing it all? You've written it, right?
Well, open sampled entity class, for example. I mean, it's not knitted. It doesn't have C alsos, but I've written the details and the usage messages. So this is for you to review, but.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. How many functions are there?
I think 6.
No, there are a lot more than that. I mean, this includes all the database, right? We're not. Is that where?
Yeah. With the data, there's 3 more symbols for databases.
Well, wait a minute. Where's the database guide page? Do we have that? Do we make a guide page already?
We had started, then you were preparing the keynote for WTC, and we stopped.
Okay.
I don't even know if you saved it. Well, actually, there was one that was database link, and we're updating it.
Well, that's not the right thing
Sparkle,
anyway.
etc.
Database connectivity. I see. This is what we were about to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So this is where we're going to start from. So how many functions are there? Where's the list of those functions?
I mean, you can do names, star, entity class.
No, that's not the only thing. You've also got database.
No, and then there are 4 more. So there are those plus entity function, database connection, database inspect, and SQL database object.
In particular, you're saying, what are you saying here? Database
connection, database inspect.
Okay, so how these things manage to get into this documentation page with the this is something, it's Andrea who's PMing here, yes? Is that right? Or who's PMing?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so something went very wrong here because these are package functions and they shouldn't have the same dark blue link color as the other stuff. Am I making sense? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I'm looking at what you're saying, but how they should look.
I don't know, but it's
Okay.
not like this, okay? And that would be a question for Brian Van Vertloos. So the ones that are built-in system functions look different.
Okay, Brian.
Okay.
I think that if you, instead of editing, you look at the documentation with DocuTools closed, they do look different. They are
okay. All right. Okay. All right. Fine. Okay. But so the functions that we need here, database connect. What is it? What are the functions called?
Database connection, database inspect, SQL database object.
Okay, and then the functions that are, okay, what's the main function here? So there's an entity class function, right? That's the main thing that represents something.
Should it go there and not in entity based?
Don't worry about where this is going yet. Don't worry. I'm just trying to get a list of functions here.
Okay. Well, I think the main function is entity value, but it's already above.
Okay, well, there's going to be a separate page about relational databases. So I think this is so that we want to make a new guide page, which is called something like Working with Relational Databases. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then the first function there is database. Is it database connection or database connect?
It's database connection. Then it has properties connect and disconnect. In general, the connection is lazy. So you don't need to explicitly connect in general, unless things go horribly wrong.
A connection to an external.
So it's useful to think about this more or less like file and URL. It's really could even not exist.
Okay, whatever. Okay, so database inspect. Then we've got SQL database object. Okay, that's those. Now, what are the other functions? So then we've got entity value, which is basically extract a value from a database. Is that right?
Yeah, an entity list is also another resolver. Then
database entity itself represents, right, something in a database.
I mean, I wouldn't put it this. I would put entity with entity class, like row-oriented things.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So then I would make a section with entity property and entity function.
Well, no. First of all, we got to have entity class because that's the main thing you work with.
Yeah.
In fact, those should be up above. But I mean, again, we're going to do this tomorrow. Okay. So entity class an implicitly defined, well, a class of entities that can be implicitly defined. Possibly that can be okay. All right. So extract a value. Well, let's see. Extract a value from an entity class. Is that correct?
No, also from an entity in case. It's really extract a value.
From an entity entity class.
You need the dyad entity class, entity property class, basically. But
okay, so wait a minute. What are you saying? Entity property is another thing we should look at.
Yeah, and entity property and entity function should have their own group, because those are the things that can go in the second argument.
Okay.
So maybe if this is just for relational databases, maybe we should say that entity class represents a whole table or a subset. There, I mean, it's a table or a computed table, and then we can say that entity represents a row and entity property represents.
Okay. Okay. So a table of entities, table or subtable of entities.
I mean, I think table is table, and I mean every table is a table.
Okay.
Well, in terms of the definitions that people usually use, if these are tables obtained from a query, they're called either virtual tables or sometimes derived tables.
Well, then they're still tables.
Yeah, but if you just leave table, that might mean something that they are not.
Okay, instead, and I wouldn't say of entities. Why don't you say a table, possibly virtual?
No, we're going to say entities because it's got the word entity right there.
Yeah, but then what do you say for entity?
Okay, you know what? We're not doing this right now.
Yeah, let's do this tomorrow.
Representation of a table or virtual table. Something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, just give me a sense of what other functions we have to document, though.
Okay, we have a filtered entity class. Those should go with the entity class and entity, I think. Filtered entity class.
And what else?
Sampled entity class, sorted entity class, merged entity class.
Okay. That's a separate thing. So those are, we're not going to put those above these very basic things like.
No, absolutely not. But I think it would be good to have a section which is all the things that can go in the first argument of entity value, and a section for all the things that can go in the second argument of entity value.
Oh, yeah, fine. That's fine. But okay, so filtered entity class. Is that right?
Yeah.
What's the next one?
Sorted entity class.
And then sampled entity class.
Yes.
Aggregated entity class.
Oh, extended first.
Before sampled?
No, after maybe.
No,
yeah.
I think so.
But before aggregated.
Okay, then aggregated entity class. Okay.
And merged entity class.
Is this it?
Yes. Which, by the way, somebody suggested at WTC we call joined. which I told them we had already discussed, and I explained why it was confusing to call it joint.
Yes, I remember that discussion. It's a long discussion. Okay, so that's all the functions. Is that correct?
Yes.
So now what about entity store and things like this?
Yeah, maybe you can put it in as well.
Okay. So you've got pages for all of those functions. Is that correct?
Yes.
By the way, Seth on our live stream is suggesting that we should have a better example for entity store than the bare bones one that we have. Tony, that's for you.
Yes.
You should do it. I agree. Okay. Hans on the live stream is suggesting absolute time for all date times in SQLite tables that need date time data type. Okay. Not quite sure I understand that one. Okay, Seth is saying making clear exactly what entity registered does would be useful. What can you do with an unregistered entity store? You can just take the unregistered entity store and do things with it right there. It's just that the entities don't implicitly make use of the entity store unless you register the entity store. Is that a fair description, Tony?
Yes.
So if you take the entity store itself and you evaluate subvalues and things, those will work.
It is, in a sense, like using a symbol that is not defined yet.
Right. Well, maybe there's something that is unclear about what's there right now about that. Yeah, we should probably show in properties and relations at the very least what happens with an entity store that hasn't been registered yet. Make sense, Tony?
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean I kind of agree with Seth that like T1, T2, E1, E2 is a bit too dry.
Yeah, well, I mean that's why this is probably better, bananas and strawberries. But I think I think we need the T1, T2 thing, but then we need some other ones under applications that are more real.
I think that I have an example with first name, age, weight, something.
You got to be more politically correct. You can't have weight. Sorry, no.
Okay, then just first name.
Can we have mass? I mean, we don't want to.
Okay,
we don't want to
mind.
assume people's gravity.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, Seth is suggesting putting the Titanic dataset into entity store, which is not a bad idea. We should have a canonical simple entity store that is a more real example. And Tony, you should, figure out what that should be.
Well, yeah, having classes be their own entity type, it's a very good idea.
Yeah, that's nice. Except that might get a little confusing with classes of service on the whatever it was, the White Star, whatever they were. First class or whatever. Yeah. Entity class that's the steerage class would be a little confusing here. Okay. Had a separate table for cabins on the Titanic. That's interesting. Okay. Okay. Comments from Seth about merged is confusing because merge means something different than join. You mean the merge function in our language?
I mean, it's really join. I mean, joined itself would be confusing because it's really not what join is doing. It's really what join across is doing. But then what's the adjective of, or the past participle of join across?
Joined across. I mean, that would be a perfectly reasonable, joined across entity class.
Oh, that's a mouthful.
Yes, it's a mouthful, but it's a full, it's a complicated concept. If that's the correct name, I mean, I don't know. Does the semantics of merged entity class, does it agree with the semantics of joined across?
Yes, and it does a little bit more, actually.
But does it have the same?
Yes.
Let's rename it.
Okay.
I think it's unnecessary. I mean, yes, it's a mouthful, but at least we don't confuse anything. Yeah, I agree. So joined across. So let's rename that.
Or should we also rename them sorted by entity class?
No, because that's unfortunately, disappointingly, sorted by entity class has that preposition, stuck in a weird place. I think we have no choice there, sadly.
Yeah, I see what you're saying is that since across can only take a plural afterwards, then it's fine. It's not confusing.
Right.
If it were joined across entity classes, then it would be confusing. Because across is just as
I understand.
much a preposition.
Okay. So Seth is commenting on selected entity rather than filtered entity. Why did we not call it selected before?
Because select, I mean, it was called entity select at some point, but the problem is that select means something very specific to people who are used to SQL, and it's not the same thing.
I see. I'm not a big fan of the word filtered because we haven't used it elsewhere. Well, anyway, oh boy, I'm about to collide with 3 other meetings here, so I think we have to wrap right now here. To be continued. I think it'd be great if we were able to live stream the our possibly quite grisly documentation session. So let's figure out how we arrange timing so that can be done.
Yeah, I mean, I would, if possible, I would avoid doing it at 8 p.m. on a Friday night. But
okay, whatever. We'll figure out a time. Okay. I will commit these changes. And to be continued. Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks to the folks on the live stream. So, okay, bye.
Bye.